Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I am actually going to be bringing you the first video in a series that I had mentioned wanting to do in my introduction video, and that would be the series about grief. Now, in the series I specifically plan to talk about the stages of grief, how I cope with those stages, like living day to day when you're stuck in a stage of grief, but I thought that the best way to start the whole series would actually be to tell you about the two situations that I plan to relate all of my stages of grief videos to, and like to give you guys examples in those videos. And the first one is actually the death of my dad. Any single person who knew my dad would have no trouble whatsoever telling you that he was an amazing person. He, of course, had his little troubles in life. He was in a lot of trouble when he was in high school, and, basically, he was a rebel, and that's okay. He was not a law-abiding, good citizen like his kids were when they were in high school, but my dad was incredibly giving. He was incredibly selfless, and I wish every day that I will turn out exactly the way my dad was. I just want people to remember me the same way that people always remember my dad. I want people to always have fond memories, and that is something that I really truly cherish now that my dad is gone, is that every time that I talk to someone about him, they always have something good to say. They always have a good story to tell, even if it's a story of him being rebellious in high school or a funny story. I have never once heard a story that was actually legitimately bad relating to my dad after his death. Now, you might say, oh, well, people aren't going to tell you a bad story, but, my dad, when it came to my brother and I, was pretty much an open book. He and I and my brother, all three, have always been very close, and when he died, it just literally, my brother and I hit rock bottom. My dad's name was Mark, and he was 44 years old at the time of his death. He passed away in June of 2013, and so I'm going to backtrack to that year right now. So I'm first going to take you back to June the 8th of 2013, and that was a Saturday, and at the time, I was already living away from home. I mean, I was living like in the same general vicinity, like 15 minutes away, but I did not live in the home anymore with my parents. I lived with my boyfriend at the time, who is now my husband, and I was actually working a job in retail, and I was at work on my break, and my mom had texted me and said, I'm taking your dad to the ER. He's throwing up. He was on his lawnmower. We had 2 acres, so he was on his riding mower, and he got off the mower throwing up, like projectile vomiting, and he just kept saying he didn't feel good. Well, the summer before, my mom had had a lot of trouble with her gallbladder, and it had caused the same kind of pain, throwing up, everything else that he was having. And now looking back, my dad actually had some symptoms related to cancer that we never would have thought. Like, we had a yard sale a couple weeks before this, and the whole time during the yard sale, he was asleep in his lawn chair. And my dad was not the kind of person who falls asleep in his lawn chair when there are other people around. He was the kind of person who, if we were having a yard sale, he was going to be out there like piddling with stuff and messing around and taking things that my mom said were good to go out and in the yard sale and saying, no, I want to keep this. That was the kind of person he was. But he, at the time, didn't care. He was asleep in his chair. But, so like I said, I was working retail. My mom had texted me, and I said, okay, well, I am leaving work at 8 o'clock, and I will head right over to the ER as soon as I get done. My dad, of course, told her, no, don't let her come. But I said, too bad, so sad. I'm an adult. I do what I want. And so at 8 o'clock, when I got off work, I went straight to the ER, and he had already had several tests run, and then shortly after I got there, they came in the room, and they said that the results of his ultrasound showed that he had had some lesions on his liver. Now, they didn't say specifically what they could be or anything. They just said, we have to admit you, we have to run a lot more tests and figure out what's going on with you. But that's why you're throwing up, is because of the lesions on your liver causing you pain in your liver, causing you to vomit. So, at that point, they did admit him, and they got him up on the floor, which my mom and I both, as my dad never saw, like, the signs on the floor, because he went up, like, the patient way. Of course, we went up the visitor way, and we saw that they had put him on the oncology floor, which actually that floor was oncology split with another thing, but I can't remember what that was now, and we were just hoping that they didn't put him there because they thought he had cancer. We were hoping that they put him there because they thought he needed to be there. It was like post-surge or something like that was the other part, because they thought he needed surgery or something like that. You know, we were hoping and praying that they did not think that he had cancer. Now, my dad, being that he was 44, he did have relatively young parents. And my grandparents are both still in their 60s, and the whole moral of telling you their age is that because they were younger grandparents and they were lucky to, you know, still have the energy and all that stuff to want to take their grandkids on trips and stuff, every year they would take us all camping. They have an RV and, well, a pull behind camper, I guess. And they would take us every single year, all 6 of us when they could, camping for a week, sometimes a little less. And that camping trip was actually scheduled for that coming up week. And we actually had a family reunion the day after my dad went to the ER. So on June the 9th, which was Sunday, we had a family reunion. Now, anybody who knows my dad or was in our family knows that my dad did not miss family reunions. Not unless he was working or absolutely had to miss, he would not miss. So, of course, it was the morning of the family reunion, and I decided that I was going to get up a little early and go see my dad before I headed over to the reunion. The reunion was actually about 20 minutes from where my parents lived, but only about 5 from where I lived. So, and then the hospital was basically right in between. So, I used that time to see my dad, enjoy a little bit of time with him before heading over to the family reunion, and had a discussion with him about what he thought about us all going on our camping trip, because of course I thought, okay, we're not going, Dad's in the hospital, there's no chance, Mama and Papa are not going to want to go. And he said no, he's going to tell Mama and Papa that we are going, whether they like it or not, they're going to take us, and we look forward to it every year, and he is going to be fine. There's nothing to worry about, and he does not want us missing on his account. And so my mama was like, okay, we'll go. And then we had the debate of, because the original plan was to leave Sunday night and set up after the reunion, and I think we ended up still doing that. I can't remember if we did that or if we waited till Monday, but she was very, reluctant. And I can understand. I mean, it was her child. And we all just had that pit of our stomach feeling that something is seriously wrong. So, as I said, we went on our camping trip, and my mama pretty much was driving back and forth every day. We were only about 45 minutes away from home, but she had other reasons to come in too. My cousins, the younger 2, they both played ball in the summer, and they would have baseball and softball practice and things such as that they had to be at. And so her way of making sure that they could come would be to run them back and forth, or at least meet my aunt. But since she also was using it as an excuse to go see my dad, she would just bring them all the way in that time, wait for them, and then take them back. And so for most of the camping trip, it was just us and my papa. And while we were all okay with that, because, I mean, my brother and I were basically just worried about my dad the whole time, but still trying to enjoy ourselves because we knew that's what he wanted us to do. Everybody else was just like, well, where's Mama? This would be more fun if Mama was here, And I totally get it. I mean, it was just a strange time. And so on Wednesday, we got a call in the morning. I think they called on, I can't remember if it was one of my grandparents' phones or my phone. I'm thinking one of my grandparents, because my brother and I both had cell phones, and so even though we didn't really use them out there because there wasn't very good service, whenever one of my grandparents had one of my parents on their phone for one of us, we knew, okay, something at home is not right. Something is messed up here. And I believe it was my mama or papa's phone that was brought to us, and they, my dad had actually told my mom he wanted us to come. And this was on Wednesday, and he was scheduled to have a biopsy of his liver that day. They were going to check out and see what the lesions were, and they were saying his blood work didn't look good, his platelet count was low. And if you want to know, if I use any medical terms that you don't understand, please Google them, or you are free to ask in the comments below. Like I said, I'm a med tech, so I do know. I can't like diagnose people. I'm not a doctor, but I know about blood work. That is my job. So, but anyway, as I said, his platelet count was low, so he was having trouble clotting and all that kind of stuff. And basically, long story short, it was time for them to figure out what was going on. They were doing a biopsy of the lesions, specifically on his liver. They had found some other lesions through doing different scans, some on his lungs and also on his spine. And so the liver was the best place because there were the most of them, I guess, and because a lung biopsy would have been a lot more invasive, whereas a liver biopsy, they could just put in an aspiration needle and pull cells from the lesion itself. And I don't exactly know how a lung biopsy works, but that was the way it was explained to us, was that this way it was just a really big needle, and like a lung biopsy, they would actually have to go in with cameras and almost do laparoscopic, which that may have changed since then. I'm not really sure, and that may depend on the hospital. So if you've seen it differently, that's cool, but that's the way it was explained to us. But anyway, so like I said, he was having his liver biopsy, and we were very nervous about it, of course. We knew about it. We hadn't really gone in to see him because he kept saying, no, stay there. I don't want the kids to come. And he just really did not want my brother and I to worry about him. And so then on Wednesday, when he said, I want them to come, my brother and I were both like, okay, we're doing it. We hopped in the truck with Mama, and we went to the hospital where my dad was. And he had his biopsy. He left for his biopsy right when we got there. And when he came back, he was in so much pain. It's almost bringing me to tears even thinking about it. He was in so much pain. And the hospitalist, I could punch that woman still to this day. I could punch her. She walks in the room as he is screaming in pain, writhing, asking for someone to please get him some pain medication, and says, Mark, you have cancer. We know you have cancer, and even though we don't know what kind yet, it is in your lungs, your liver, and your spine, and it was probably caused by your smoking. Now, if it weren't for the fact that I was freaking out at that very moment and oh my God, my dad has cancer, my whole world just crashed down around me, and plus, being that I was in the middle of going to tech school at the time, I knew that, a lot of people would know it anyway, but, being that I was doing medical type school at the time, I knew that having cancer on your spine was not good. Having cancer on your liver was not good. Your blood goes through your liver, and so that's why liver cancer is so deadly. And, I don't know. At the time, what actually happened at the time is that as soon as I heard the news, I could not stay in the room because I did not want my dad to see me freak out. And he was already in so much pain, and I did not want him to see how bad it tore me up to hear that. So I went out of the room and lost it in the hallway. And I was like, basically on the ground, couldn't hardly pick myself up, and the nurses are all staring at me like, oh my God, what'd they just tell this family? And then my brother walks out there, and I stood up and just like fell on him. We were both crying. Like, my brother does not cry a lot. Even at my dad's funeral, he didn't cry a lot. I mean, he cried, but he didn't cry a lot. You know, like, I was in hysterics the whole time. And my brother, you know, he had his moments when, like during the eulogy, when they talked about my brother and, like what he had said about my dad and what my dad meant to him and all that stuff. He cried during that. But, you know, otherwise he didn't really... He's not like a huge expresser of emotions. And I'm sure that like when he's all by himself, his emotions come out, you know, but like you're not going to see it yourself. And so when my brother like grabbed me and was crying too, I knew like this is what in the world has just happened to our family, our perfect family. You know, like my mom and dad were still married, and they had been married for, I don't remember how many years right this second, but, you know, it was going on 25. It was pretty close to a quarter of a century that they'd been married. And I just still to this day can't believe that we, like just a few weeks before, we're at my brother's high school graduation taking pictures as a family of 4. And like our last picture as a family of 4 was actually on June the 2nd. And you can't even tell looking at the picture that something was wreaking havoc on my dad's body. Like you would have no idea that he had cancer if you didn't know what had happened to him. And I just can't, I'm sure this video is all over the place and I am so sorry, but I just cannot, like, even when I was thinking about it and thinking about sitting down and doing it, I was like, okay, I'm going to talk about it in this specific order. But what you'll learn is that every time you revisit these situations, you're just like, you know, like you think of something new, like, I don't know. Anyway, so, as I said, I could punch that woman, because who comes in when a guy is writhing in pain like that? His kids are in the room, which that was part of why he wanted us there. He wanted us to hear it straight from the doctor. He didn't want to have to tell us himself, and he wanted us there for moral support as he went through the biopsy, because it was basically going to be the worst procedure of all the procedures he'd been through there. And I just can't, I don't know. She didn't even let him get pain medication in his system from having the biopsy before she started in on him. Like, what in the world is wrong with this woman? I was so angry. So angry. And so, anyway, so angry. That's how I was. So, we get that news, and immediately my mama calls my papa, who is camping, and tells him, pack up the camper, get the older kids that are still there to help you, get them to throw Sarah and Chase's stuff together, because actually, my one cousin is only 3 months younger than me, and so, you know, being that we're the older girls, and, that we were the oldest, and that, there just wasn't enough room for all of us to sleep in the camper, we would always sleep outside in a tent while everybody else slept inside. And we were cool with that because, you know, we were teenage girls and we liked to, well, actually at the time we were in our 20s, but we liked to, you know, be outside in the tent. We could stay up for a little while at night as long as we were quiet, because there were quiet hours at the campground. And, we enjoyed it. And so they basically said, okay, throw Sarah's stuff in the camper, not in the house, in the camper, and go ahead and pack up and get home, because well, basically pack up because we have Papa's truck. And so she said, pack up, and we're gonna come get you guys because we gotta go back home. And told him, you know, Mark has cancer. And I was not there for this, and I thank goodness that I was not, because it was hard enough to watch my mama get upset, but my dad and his dad were extremely close, and my papa, kind of like my brother, has never been one to really show a lot of emotion until my dad died. Now I see so much emotion out of him, it literally breaks my heart every time. But according to my cousin, when My papa found out on the phone. He dropped the phone, slumped in the chair, and was crying. And then was just like, you guys have to get ready. Like, we have to go take down the volleyball net, because we put up like a little volleyball net that I guess it was a badminton net. So we would play volleyball or badminton. We had this, it's like called ladder ball, I think, but we call it hillbilly golf. So he was like, get all that stuff up, take the tent down, do all the things, and basically told my cousins, get ready because we're going home. And so then we got there, and the only reason really why my brother and I went back was because my brother didn't want to be home alone, and I was going because my car was there. Because there wasn't enough room in my papa's truck to take all of us, and so, of course, some of us had to drive, and so my car was there, and so I had to go get my car, and, I just remember, that whole 45-minute drive back home thinking to myself, this is really happening, this is life now, but it's okay, because your dad has cancer, but he's gonna beat it. That was all it was in my head, was he's gonna beat it, he's the strongest person he's going to beat it. Now let's take a quick fast forward to Friday, which was Wednesday was June the 12th. I just cannot ever get that date out of my head because of how traumatizing that hospitalist was. So Friday, the day of his first oncology appointment, that was June the 14th. And this was 2 days before Father's Day. Bear that in mind as you, continue to watch this video. So at his first oncology appointment, we went in, and it was my dad and mom, my brother and I, and my mama. My papa was like, I can't go, I can't do it, I can't handle it. And so my mama she wanted to know what was going on, and she didn't want to have to hear it from my dad. She thought it would be easier on him and on her if she just went and heard it for herself. If she had questions, she could ask the doctor. But pretty much I had a whole list of questions because my husband's grandmother, I will talk on her in another video, unfortunately, she had breast cancer, and so she and I had talked on the phone one night, and like I said, at the time she was just my boyfriend, but his family was so supportive of us through this whole time. But anyway, she and I talked on the phone, and it was our first major phone conversation, and she basically was like, here's all the questions that you really need to ask his oncologist. You need to know this information up front. And it was like, okay. So she gave me a whole list. I had a big notebook. I brought it with me. Didn't ask a single question in it because we were so shocked. At his oncology appointment, which we loved his doctor, and I'm so sad that, I'm not sad that my dad didn't have to go through chemo or anything, but I am sad that he didn't get the opportunity to fight it, because even though the doctor didn't give him a good outlook, he was like, miracles happen, just pray. And our family is not really religious, but my dad was even like, we'll pray, we'll do it, we'll do whatever we have to do. I want to be here for my kids. He didn't want any of this. And probably when he was 13 or 14 years old, when he had started smoking, if somebody would have told him at the time, hey, you're going to get cancer when you're 44, he probably never would have done it. So at the oncology appointment, the doctor actually told us that my dad had basically 6 weeks to live without chemo. And if he did chemo, he felt that he could probably live for another 6 to 9 months. But he really felt like 9 was pushing it, and that 6 was going to be his best chance. And we were devastated. I mean, this is June. We were sitting here thinking, every single one of us in the room knew that there was no chance in the world that my dad was going to choose to not do whatever it took to stay here as long as he could. And so every single person in the room, without question, knew that he was going to choose to do the chemo. And we just immediately thought to ourselves, 6 months is Christmas. So you're telling us we're either going to be mourning his loss at Christmas, or we are going to be spending our last Christmas with him trying not to tear up at every moment, at every gift, at every, what do you buy somebody who knows that they're going to die in a month? And I know it's not about the gifts and stuff, but my dad, like I said, was a super giving person. And I am a giving person. Like, my favorite part of Christmas is giving gifts. I don't care about getting them. Nobody has to buy me a thing, but I don't even like shopping, but I love to go out and pick people out gifts. That is the part of Christmas that I love. And I know it's not about that. It has nothing to do with that, but it's just a big part of it for me. And, my dad was the same way. He loved to give gifts. One year, my mom and dad realized that last minute that they had bought like $200 worth more of gifts for my brother than they had for me. They had like 2 things for me. And even though, like I said, doesn't matter. I've never cared about getting gifts itself. They were like, we can't spend $20 on one kid and $200 on another. My dad hates crowds, and he hated shopping. And he took me out on Christmas Eve. And we live in a relatively big city. He took me out on Christmas Eve shopping and got me everything that I wanted, basically. He was like, pick out what you want. I'll wrap it. You're going to open it for Christmas tomorrow. Okay. Like that is one of like, when I talk to people about my dad, that is one of my favorite memories to tell them, because it just was like the epitome of who he was. And he would have done anything for my brother and I. Now, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. So, back to the oncology appointment. So my dad, of course, tells him he's going to do the chemo, and he says, okay, go up there and get scheduled. You're getting like, they gave us a tour of the oncology center, which was really beautiful. And, even though lots of horrible things are going on there because, people are getting treatment for their cancer, and chemo just is crazy on you. It was just a really beautiful, serene place, and I could understand why they make it that way. And so they showed us around, and they said, you can have this many people with you at every chemo treatment, and this is where they'll sit. They had like a little area, like basically a cubby hole for every person. And they had like a little couch sitting there too. Like, they had the patient's chair, which was like a recliner type chair. And then they had like a couch sitting there, and you could sit with your family members who came with you. And I think 2 were allowed, because we were like, are we ever going to figure out which 2 of us are allowed to go? But anyway, so my dad was like, okay, we're going to go up front and get scheduled, get out of here. I don't want to be here anymore. I want to go home. So, because he'd already had enough of hospitals for the week, and he was going to have to come back on Monday. He was going to be doing multiple treatments a week for 2 weeks, and then go on like an every week, once a week, and then every week, twice a week, or every other week. I'm sorry. He was on a weird schedule. But anyway, so they were going to start him off on Monday morning. And like I said, this was Friday, so we had the weekend to prepare. And so he had been given like a whole host of medications already. And so we went, picked up all his medications. I got him a pill box and a pill splitter. And I made him a pill schedule and all kinds of things that you do for your dad when you find out he has cancer. And so, we were just getting him all set up. Immediately after we got Dad back from his oncology appointment and started to get everything set up, I went over to my boyfriend, like I said, now my husband's, family's house, and he was over there hanging out with them while I was at the appointment. And I walked in and I told him what happened, and I just cried, and he cried, and then I'm pretty sure his parents cried when they found out. It was just overall very devastating and hard to hear that, somebody who had such an impact on everybody's life was just having such a rough go of it, basically. So then that night, and actually I hadn't mentioned this before, but most of the time I didn't actually talk about my boyfriend being at any of this, because he was working 12-hour nights. And so he was on a rotation, so there were some nights that he was off. However, for most of the things that we were there for. It just so happened that those were days that he worked on the rotation, and so he was working or sleeping to be working that night while we were at appointments or the hospital or what have you. And so that night he was having to go to work, and as a result I didn't want to be by myself, and so my cousin was like, hey, I'm thinking about going out to this, local place. You want to go? And so I agreed to go and, had a drink, tried to unwind, but it really was just kind of silly because it did not do me any good. I just remember thinking to myself, like, because I was supposed to go back to work the next day, because we were intended to come home from our camping trip on Friday, and so I was going to go back to work on Saturday, and I just remember thinking to myself, there is no way. So then on Saturday, once I got up, which took a little bit to convince myself, you actually do have to get out of bed. Once I convinced myself to do that, I was like, okay, I don't want to sit here by myself. I didn't really want to go to the house because I had texted my mom and she said, your dad's been sleeping all morning. It's been a rough few days for him. I'm just going to let him sleep. I'm not going to wake him up. And I'm like, all right, that's fine. And so I decided I was going to go to my grandparents' house. And so I went to their house, took a nap in their chair, spent the whole afternoon there. I feel like they maybe had some visitors, people coming to like ask how dad was and stuff. I don't really remember a whole lot of that day specifically. I remember that evening, like 5 or 6 o'clock. I'm thinking closer to 6. I had basically told her, look, Mama and I really want to come see Dad. We want to talk to him, see how he's doing, all that stuff. So, is he up yet? And she texted back that no, he was not up yet. He'd been kind of napping on and off all day long, and they had run like quick errands that morning, but that was really it. And it wasn't like pressing errands that would have wore him out, And I was like, okay, a grown man cannot sleep all day long without there being some underlying thing. I mean, obviously he has cancer, but there could be something going on here. And so I told Mom, well, we're coming over, maybe you can see if he'll wake up. So when we got over there, she was like, he's in the bed, he won't get up, And when she said he's in the bed, she didn't mean in her bed, like in their bedroom. She meant in my brother's bed, in his old bedroom. And so I went in there and looked at him, and he was jaundiced. And I could tell just by looking at his skin, which my dad was actually really tan. And so that, I can't really say I could tell just by looking at his skin. I could tell when he opened his eyes to look at me. I mean, I thought that his skin looked off, but I was just kind of like, okay, yeah, maybe just because I don't really know, like, I'm pale, and that's not what my skin would look like. So, but as soon as he opened his eyes and looked at me, I was like, oh, crap. We are in deep doo-doo here. And knowing that, he just had a biopsy on his liver, all that kind of stuff, I kind of was like, okay, Mom, what did you guys do today? Did you do anything today? Did he take his pills today? What did he take? What did he eat? I was asking her a bunch of questions, and she's just like, oh, I don't know, Well, anyway, so long story short, I asked my dad, do you know who I am? And he looked dead at me and said, yes. And I said, okay, who am I? And he couldn't tell me. I said, you can't tell me who I am? Do you know my name? He said, yes. And I said, okay, what's my name? And he couldn't answer me. And I said, Mom, you need to call an ambulance right now. And so she was just like, what? What is going on? And I said, he is having an issue with his liver. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know who I am. I'm his kid. I'm like one of the 2 most important parts of his world, my brother and I, like I said. And he had no idea who I was just by looking at me. And so I was like, okay, I looked at his eyes. He was jaundiced. He was having a liver issue. His memory was going, it was time to go to the hospital. And so I said, Mom, you need to call an ambulance right now. And my brother had literally just left to go to a bonfire at a friend's house. And I called him and I said, I don't know whose house you're at. And it just so happened he was actually just over the fence at the back door neighbor's house. I said, I don't know whose house you're at or when you left. It was like right before that. I said, but you need to come now. They're getting ready to put Dad in an ambulance. And he said, what? And so he came back, and the first responders got there. So it was the fire department, and they came in and assessed him. And we said he's a cancer patient. And they took one look at him and said, yeah, he needs to go. And when the ambulance got there, they quickly carted him away and took him straight to the ER. My brother and I hopped in the back seat of my grandparents' car because, like I said, my grandparents were there. And we all went to the ER at the same hospital he had just been to. And then we waited because you could only have 2 visitors in the ER at a time. And so we were kind of like taking turns going back there, but it was mostly my mom and my mama. And so then they tell us that where he had his liver biopsy, he was actually bleeding out. Because his platelet count had been so low and he could not clot. The clot from his biopsy had basically come off, like the scab that had created inside of his body had come off, and unfortunately that meant that because of his low platelet count, he couldn't clot again, and so he was bleeding out from his liver. And their only option was to take him to an emergency surgery where they would basically do a laparoscopic surgery with the cameras and all that stuff, and they would try to place a stent in his liver to prevent him from bleeding. And well, they were going to place a stent, and then they were going to like cauterize the one vessel or something that part was going to prevent him from bleeding. By that point, most of my family that was directly related to my dad was there. And so that included like his siblings and then a couple of my cousins and of course us. And we were the few of us that, were like my brother and I, my mom and papa, and my mom. We all went back there to, tell my dad basically good luck on your surgery. We'll see you when you get out. We were told when he's done, he's going straight to ICU because of the type of surgery, I guess. And so he'll be hooked up to a whole bunch of stuff and all that. So you guys can go wait in the ICU waiting room, and that's where we will come find you. And so the last words that I ever truly said to my dad, well, I mean, I said plenty of words to him, but I said, good luck, Dad, love you. And he said, I know you do. Really, Dad? That was the last words that my dad ever said directly to me was, I know you do. Sent him on back to surgery, and of course, like they said, we could go to the ICU waiting room. By then, it was like past hours where we could get into the hospital, so they had to like patch us from the ER over to the regular hospital, and then we all went up to the ICU waiting room, and we kind of just made camp there, essentially. We knew that the surgery wasn't supposed to take a really long time, but it ended up taking quite a few hours longer than they said it would. We were all, by the time they came out, sleeping on the couches, on the chairs, on the floor, sleeping anywhere and everywhere that we could find a place to sleep in that waiting room. And I believe during the surgery, we went to McDonald's and got some food. We basically just tried to take our minds off of it, but still just like be in waiting for when the surgeon came back in to tell us what had happened. And when he came back in, he actually told us that Dad's surgery was not successful. And I remember my brother was supposed to be sleeping, but he was not asleep. And I thought he was, so did my aunts and all that stuff. And I remember saying, okay, I gotta wake up Chase and tell him. And they were all like, let him sleep, don't worry him, it's all right, you can tell him in the morning. And I walked over to Chase, I put my hand on him, I said, Chase, and I was like trying to wake him up, and I could tell that he was like faced the other way and he was crying. And I said, Bub, they said Dad's surgery didn't work. And he said, I know, I heard him. And later on when we've had conversations about it, he was always kind of like, thanks for making sure I was included and not trying to exclude me. Like, everybody kind of treated it like, okay, Sarah's this big adult, she can know all the things, but Chase is this little kid and he can't know all the things, even though we're only 2 years apart. My brother had literally just graduated high school and turned 19. I was 21. And so it didn't really make any sense. I mean, I guess in a sense it did seem like he was so much younger than me, especially because I was like, I knew all the medical terminology and stuff that they were saying, and people kept turning to me and asking me, what did that mean, you know? But at the same time, you know, I was his big sister, and I felt like it was my job to make sure that he was not only informed of everything, but also that he was okay. You know, like, most of the time, I mean, of course, my main concern through the whole thing was my dad, but a lot of the time, my very next concern was, how's my brother feeling or doing or thinking, you know? But anyway, moving on. So, like I said, they came out and told us that dad's surgery was not successful, and I don't remember all the exact details from there, but basically he went on a pretty quick downhill slump, and eventually, you know, on Sunday, which was Father's Day, they told us that we needed to start talking about palliative care. And if you don't know what that is, that's basically when you need to start thinking about comfort measures only. And so you're just trying to keep your loved one comfortable until they can pass on their own. And that was devastating, heartbreaking. Like, we thought we had until at least December with Dad, and all of a sudden we have a couple hours, maybe a couple days if we're lucky, weeks, you know. What do we have here? And I remember his oncologist came in to see him, our family doctor came in to see him, you know, and they were all just like, I can't. Our family doctor especially could not believe it because, like I said, my dad went to doctor's appointments so that he could get his medication, and he had like liver levels checked and everything at these doctor's appointments, and they never saw anything that indicated anything at all was going on with him. And I think the last time he had his blood work was in April. And so this was June. That was April. You're telling me that he had no signs of anything in April? I mean, it's just crazy how fast some cancers can spread. And my dad, we found out, actually had small cell metastatic lung cancer, which I know I didn't specifically say that at any one point. But small cell lung cancer is actually the most aggressive form of lung cancer. And I believe, I can't say this for 100% sure, but I believe from most things that I have read about it, that once you're diagnosed with small cell lung cancer, they basically consider it terminal. I'm sure that like if they catch it like super, super early, they could probably do something about it. Like, I know people have like lung surgery or removal of a lung transplants. You know, maybe that would be an option, but I believe that like on chemo itself, you're considered terminal. But anyway, so as I said, my dad had a very aggressive form of cancer, and so, you know, they're telling us palliative care, and we had no idea how long that meant that we had with him. We just knew like he was on a vent and, you know, all kinds of other things, and he looked miserable, and it was just horrible. So they basically brought in like somebody specifically to talk to us about it, but then also somebody from the hospice center where we ended up placing him for the last ended up being a couple hours of his life, came in to talk to us about, you know, insurance and all the other crap that we didn't really care about. We mostly cared about what their facility was like. Is it a nice facility? Is it going to be a place where he is going to be comfortable? And is it a place where our family's going to be able to be with him, especially with as many of us as there were? We had at that point decided that we did not want to take him home. We did not know how much time we were going to have with him, and as much as we would have liked for him to be home, he was in pretty bad shape, and so it would have basically been constant care. Like, even if there was a hospice nurse there, like the hospice nurses aren't like there with you 24/7, and so it would have been my mom and I taking care of him, and he would not have wanted that at all, and we know he wouldn't have. And so we decided to put him in this hospice center, and the place was very, very nice, and he was transported there on Monday. And so Monday, it was like Monday mid-afternoon that they transported him, and we followed the ambulance transport there, and We actually had plans to bring our dog in the next day and all kinds of things, because they were going to let us bring him in. Like, they had this beautiful, like, garden patio thing outside of all the doors, and each room had its own opening to the patio, and so they said as long as you bring the dog in the outside way, you can bring him in. And, you know, they had a big kitchen, and my aunt had come from Texas, and she was going to cook us a big breakfast the next morning, and all kinds of stuff. And we basically set up camp in their big family waiting room, and, you know, kept going back to visit my dad, and then we'd come out and, like, do puzzles and stuff that they had in their waiting room. But then, like, it started to get closer to nighttime, and you could tell he really wasn't doing well. Everybody was just kind of hanging around, and, my dad, as I said, wasn't doing well, but it seemed like, you know, we'd probably have him at least through the night. If not, we might lose him during the night. But we basically decided, you know, as long as somebody was awake with him at all times, we were okay with that. And the nurse had basically said, I'll alert you guys anyway, because I know you want to be there with him. And so we all tried our best to get sleep. I'm pretty sure my grandparents didn't. They tried to stay up, and, but I know my brother and I, the nurse showed us this room that was, like, super quiet and kind of out of the way, and my brother slept on the couch, and I was sleeping on the floor. Or, well, we weren't sleeping, we were kind of laying there, when my aunt came in and said, if you guys want to be with him, it's time to go. And so we went. You know, my brother basically had to pick me up off the floor because I could not believe that this was happening. And so they took us in there, and I mean, within a couple minutes, my dad took his last breaths. And I am so thankful to this day that my brother dragged me in there, made me go, because I couldn't imagine not having been there when he passed and being with him and holding his hand, you know. And I don't know. There's, like, something special about being with someone when they, like, take their last breaths, even if that is a really, really hard time. And whatever is special about it is something that I'm glad that I didn't miss out on, for sure. And, as I said, like, once he passed, the place was, like, so nice. They didn't, like, force us out of the room or anything. The nurse did come in to, like, give a time of death and all that stuff. So she checked, you know, his pulse and all that, made sure he was really gone. And then, you know, she took, like, requests from us about, like, you know, how to cut his hair and all that, which she wasn't going to be doing any of that. But, you know, she kind of wanted to prep him. She was going to, like, trim his nails and all that kind of thing. And so, she was, like, prepping him to go. And so since she was doing that, she was, like, making sure that everything was going to be exactly as we wanted it to be. And she was so nice. I just remember that, like, crazy how nice she was. But anyway, so that was, like, 3:15 in the morning. And so by about the time that we got back to my grandparents' house, it was, like, 5. And later that day, we were going to be going and actually doing the funeral arrangements. So we kind of fell asleep at my grandparents' house. My brother was with me. My mom actually had gone home, and her sister was with her, I think. My sister, or her sister, may have been at my grandma's house, but I remember, you know, us all being at my grandparents' house, and my uncle bringing us donuts when we woke up. And I don't know. I just remember, like, how, like, they knew that we were all really going through it, and they just tried to be there for us. And I appreciate all of them so much, because they were going through it too, but they recognized that, like, these kids and my dad's parents and my mom were all having a really, really hard time, and they, like, held out on their own grief to take care of us. And, you know, it comes time for your funeral home services and your funeral, and it just seems like time kind of stands still. And, you know, we laid my dad to rest at a beautiful cemetery underneath of a tree, and I don't know. I don't even have words for how amazing, like, his funeral was. Like, we played Ozzy Osbourne at his funeral because if anybody knew my dad, that's what he would have wanted. And I don't know. I don't even know how to like wrap up a video about my dad's death, except that to say that, you know, this year will be 5 years since my dad passed away. I still miss him every single day, but there's like so many, like it has not gotten easier. I won't say for a second that it has gotten easier, or that it like goes away, because it never does. But it has gotten easier to like smile instead of cry. If you've made it this far in the video, I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you getting into the few different little series that I have done. If you have any suggestions for any of my videos, whether it be Disney, Harry Potter, any of the things that I mentioned in my intro I might make videos on, please put them below, as well as any comments about this video. And feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.